Dozens of students, including a 3-year-old girl, kidnapped at dawn. Authorities say the abductor struck quickly before sunrise. Villagers are still in shock tonight as search efforts intensify.
When the sun rose, they were gone. A schoolyard once filled with laughter stood silent, desks cold, books unopened. In the faint light of morning, the truth lay scattered in the dirt, sandals, notebooks, a doll with one missing eye. Somewhere beyond the village edge, feet were moving fast. Little feet, tired feet, being pulled by strangers into the unknown. Nobody saw them leave. No alarms, no cries that reached far enough to warn the rest. Only a hollow stillness that settled over the houses, as if the land itself knew what had happened, but could not speak it aloud. In a place where every face is known, where every child's laughter is a shared treasure, the absence of even one is a wound, but dozens. Dozens taken in the darkness. That is something else entirely. And among them, a little girl, no more than 3 years old. Too young to understand danger, too small to fight it. Her disappearance was not just a crime, it was a message. This was not the first time. And if the whispers in the village were true, it would not be the last. This is where the story begins. It began like any other morning. The roosters crowed before the sun fully broke the horizon. Women stoked cooking fires, their hands quick and practiced, the scent of maize and smoke drifting through the cool air. Children emerged from doorways in 2s and 3s, uniforms clean but worn, shoes dusty from the day before. They walked in small groups, laughter carrying lightly on the breeze. The path to school was a familiar one. Past the well, past the mango tree with its early green fruit, past the bend where the older boys sometimes raced. There was no sense of danger, not yet. But then, the sound. A deep, rolling growl that did not belong to morning. Engines where no engines should be. The first truck came fast. Then another. And another. Gunfire split the air, not aimed, not yet, but into the sky, a cruel announcement. Birds scattered from the trees in a frenzy. They moved quickly, shouts in a language some of the children didn't even understand. Arms grabbing, shoving. The older boys tried to resist, but the rifles ended that thought in an instant. In less than a minute, the peaceful road had become a trap. Long before this morning, the elders told a story. The hawk and the chicks. At sunrise, when the chicks are still warm beneath their mother's wings, the hawk waits in the high branches. He does not rush. He does not warn. He waits for the first light to touch the ground, and then he strikes. The chicks never hear the wind of his wings until his shadow is already upon them. And when he is gone, the nest is empty, save for the feathers drifting in the air. That morning, the hawk came in trucks. And the chicks had nowhere to run. It began with one mother noticing the time. Her son should have been at the schoolyard by now, his voice calling to friends over the low wall. But the road to the school was empty. And when she reached the gates, so was the yard. One by one, other parents arrived, at first puzzled, then alarmed. Desks sat untouched. Notebooks lay open where small hands had left them. A single pencil rolled slowly across the floor as if still remembering the child who had held it. The first cries broke the silence, a mother's voice rising, sharp with panic. Then another. And another. Soon, the air was filled with wailing, the kind that carries through bone and earth. Men abandoned their work in the fields. Women dropped baskets of grain in the dust. The search began without plan, without pause, only instinct. But the tracks were already fading. The sun had baked the ground hard. And the wind erased the story the earth might have told. The local leader, an old man whose voice carried weight, ordered the drum to be sounded. A deep, rhythmic beat rolled through the village, summoning everyone to the baobab tree. Here, words were few. Faces spoke louder. Mothers clutched scarves to their mouths. Fathers stared at the ground, fists clenched. The question was simple: where had they gone? But the answer was nowhere to be found. No one had seen the trucks leave. No one knew which road they had taken. The bush spread out in every direction, thick and endless. In that silence, the truth settled in: the children could be anywhere. The search party split, moving toward the rivers, the hills, the old cattle tracks. Every path led to dust and emptiness. The air grew heavier with each passing hour. By the time the sun began to sink, the village had no answers. Only fear. And then, just as night began to fall, the first ransom message arrived. The message was short and cruel. It had been shoved into the hands of a boy from the next village, who ran until his breath failed. Written in hurried, uneven lines, it carried no greeting, no mercy. Only orders and threats. And there, in the middle of it, her name. The youngest. The 3-year-old girl. They had taken her not just as a hostage, but as a warning. The kidnappers demanded more than the village could ever hope to gather. A fortune in local terms, livestock, gold, cash, to be handed over within days. And in the letter's final lines, they promised that if their demands were not met, the youngest would be the first to disappear. One mother, her son among the missing, would later say she felt as if her heart had been stolen from her chest, replaced with a stone. She could not eat. Could not sleep. Every sound was a gunshot in her mind. The elders tell another story: the crocodile who took the calf. When the river ran low one season, a calf wandered to drink. From beneath the murky water, the crocodile washed. He had eaten well the day before. He was not hungry. But his heart was greedy. So he rose up, jaws wide, and took what he did not need. When the herdsmen came, they could only watch from the bank, powerless. The river had swallowed both the calf and the hope of its return. That was how it felt for the parents that night. They stood at the edge of a river they could not cross, staring into waters ruled by men with guns. And the men in the shadows knew it. This kidnapping was not the first. And it would not be the last. In recent months, the attacks had grown bolder, with daylight strikes, larger groups, heavier weapons. The kind of crimes that once belonged to whispered campfire stories were now happening in open fields, in front of witnesses. Each time, the authorities promised swift action. And each time, the perpetrators vanished into the bush, as if swallowed by the land itself. In villages like this, security was a fence of promises, thin, rusted, and easy to break. The elders had a saying: when the fence falls, the goats wander. But here, it was not goats that wandered. It was men with rifles, hunting in packs, knowing no one could stop them. Some blamed the lack of soldiers in rural areas. Others whispered of corruption, bribes paid to look the other way. And for many here, it no longer mattered whether the problem was neglect or betrayal. The result was the same: when the trucks came, no help would arrive. The state's grip was loosening, and in the gaps, lawlessness had begun to bloom. But in the quiet that followed the ransom note, one man stood apart from the rest. He didn't sit in silence. He didn't look to the ground. He spoke softly, but with certainty. He swore he knew where they were being kept. They set out before sunrise, hunters, vigilantes, and a handful of police officers. There was no formal command, no polished strategy. Only the belief that waiting would mean losing the children forever. The man who claimed to know their location led the way. He spoke little. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the land rose into thick forest. Every sound mattered now, the snap of a twig, the rush of wings from a startled bird, the whisper of wind through the trees. In this place, silence was never empty. It was watching. The elders tell of the hunter who chased the shadow. He saw a dark shape slipping between the trees and believed it was a deer. He followed it deeper, plunged deeper into the forest, ignoring the warnings of the birds overhead. But the shadow was not prey. It was the forest itself, leading him away from the path, into the waiting arms of his enemies. By the time he realized the truth, the way home was gone. Hours passed before they saw it, faint, almost invisible at first. A thin thread of smoke curling up from somewhere deep within the trees. They did not speak. They didn't need to. The smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. And in this forest, people meant danger. They moved closer, too close. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of voices. The camp was near, close enough to feel the heat of its fire in their minds. But the forest had ears. The first shot cracked through the trees, sudden, sharp, and far too close. Then another. Then many. The ambush came from two sides. Shadows moving fast between tree trunks. The air filled with gunfire, shouts, and the hollow thud of boots on dry earth. They had no choice. Outnumbered and exposed, they began to pull back, one step, then another, then running full into the undergrowth. The smoke from the camp still rose in the distance, but now it was beyond reach. Morale was broken. A man was injured, the enemy was stronger than they had feared, and the children were still in the hands of men who thrived on fear. Days began to pass like this, each one an ache. Each sunrise a reminder that the children were still out there, their laughter stolen, their innocence held hostage by rifles in the dark. Later, one survivor would tell what it was like inside. The children were kept together in a rough circle of thorn branches, the ground beneath them hard and cold. Guards moved around the perimeter, rifles always within reach. Food came once a day, a thin porridge, passed around in dented metal bowls. Water was taken from the river and tasted of mud. At night, the youngest would cry, soft at first, then louder as the darkness deepened. She called for her mother, her voice breaking with each word. The older children tried to hush her, wrapping their small arms around her, whispering promises they could not keep. The kidnappers had their own rituals. Before sleeping, they circled the fire, chanting words the children didn't understand. They threw strange powders into the flames, watching the smoke curl and twist as if reading it. Days blurred into nights, nights into days. And though the forest surrounded them, the children felt as if the world had ended at the wall of thorns. In the stillness of the village night, as the search dragged on and fear thickened like smoke, the elders gathered once more beneath the baobab tree. Faces were tired, hope one thing. But one voice, old, weathered, and steady, rose above the murmurs. Elder Adebayo leaned forward, his eyes reflecting both wisdom and grief. He spoke of a story passed from generation to generation, a story few had heard in its entirety. It was called The Drum That Spoke Truth. Long ago, in a time of great darkness, a greedy warlord took children from villages to work as his slaves. He believed no one would dare challenge him. But in his arrogance, he stole a sacred drum, a drum said to have been carved by the ancestors themselves. Every night, when the warlord's camp was silent, the drum would begin to speak. And it would tell the truth of his crimes. It spoke the names of the missing, the place where they were hidden, and even the day he would fall. The warlord tried to silence it, covering it, burying it, even smashing it into pieces, but still, the truth found its way into the hearts of the people. And when the time came, they rose together, and the warlord's reign ended beneath the very tree he had once mocked. The elder's voice trembled, but his eyes burned. Evil, he said, cannot hide forever. The truth will find a drum. His words settled over the villagers like the night mist, a promise that, though the forest was deep and the danger great, the kidnapper's time was numbered. And somewhere, even now, the drum was already speaking. The tension in the village had reached breaking point. Days had bled into nights, and each passing hour felt like a wound that refused to close. Mothers sat in circles outside their homes, whispering prayers that carried into the dry evening wind. Fathers stood in small groups, heads bent, voices low, not in gossip, but in desperate strategy. At the center of it all, under the baobab tree, community leaders gathered with a few weary police officers and the hunters who had survived the ambush. They were not just men and women of authority, they were parents, uncles, aunts, people whose veins carried the same dust as the children now held in the forest. Negotiations began in hushed tones. Runners were sent with messages to contacts who might know the kidnappers' demands. Others reached out to old allies in nearby villages, men who knew the deep forest paths and the unspoken rules of moving at night. But every hour wasted meant another tear shed, another sob muffled under a mother's headscarf. By nightfall, a plan emerged, not from a single mind, but from the collective heartbeat of a community that refused to break. They would strike under the cover of darkness. The forest that night was a living thing, its shadows thick, its silence heavy. Every footstep crunched softly on the dry leaves, every breath was measured. Hunters moved in pairs, their eyes scanning every rustle, every flicker of movement. A few police officers carried rifles, their fingers brushing the triggers. In the distance, faint light. A fire. And the low hum of voices. The signal was given. What followed was chaos. A sudden rush forward. Shouts tearing through the night. The kidnappers, startled, scrambled for their weapons. Gunfire cracked, echoing through the trees. Some men fled into the darkness, vanishing into the undergrowth. Others dropped what they carried and disappeared between the shadows. But through the noise, there was another sound, small, high-pitched, trembling. A child's cry. In the confusion, one hunter broke from the group, following the sound into a cluster of makeshift huts. Inside, huddled together, were the children, eyes wide, cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. The youngest, barely 3 years old, clung to the arm of an older boy. They were pulled out, one by one, into the safety of the night. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, the air was filled with the sound of feet running to meet them, voices calling names, sobs turning into laughter. Mothers fell to their knees, clutching their children as if they might disappear again. Fathers pulled their families close, their voices breaking in gratitude. And there, in the middle of the crowd, the 3-year-old girl was lifted into her mother's arms. The woman's tears fell onto her daughter's hair, her sobs shaking her shoulders. The child, too young to understand the depth of what had happened, only wrapped her tiny arms around her mother's neck, holding on, as if she never meant to let go. The kidnappers had fled into darkness. But the children had come home. The village woke to a dawn unlike any other. The cries that once echoed from the hills were now the cries of joy and of grief. Mothers clutched their children as if they would never let go again, their hands trembling, their tears soaking tiny faces. The air smelled of firewood and relief, yet beneath it all, there was something else, the faint scent of fear that refused to fade. Some children smiled shyly, hiding behind their mothers, but their eyes told a different story. They had seen things no child should see. They had walked in the shadow of men who believed fear was a language worth teaching. In the dusty square, drums beat a rhythm of homecoming. Neighbors embraced. The rescued 3-year-old sat in her mother's lap, clinging to her wrapper, her tiny fingers curled tight as though she feared the world might snatch her away again. But just beyond the joy, families stood with bowed heads. For them, no drumbeat could mend the emptiness. A father's place at the table remained cold. An older brother, gone. A cousin, never returning. That night, as the fires burned low and the village tried to sleep, the narrator's voice would echo in the mind. The hawk may be gone, but the sky is never empty. And far away, beyond the river and into the hills, somewhere in the darkness, the kidnappers walked on, shadows slipping into shadows. The night has passed, but in many corners of the world, the danger still walks in daylight. What happened here is not only a story from one village, it is a warning for all. The chains that bound those children were not just of rope, but of fear, silence, and neglect. Slow dissolve to shots of children playing in safety, contrasted with brief flashes of abandoned sandals, empty classrooms, and the tear-streaked face of the 3-year-old girl. Evil thrives where eyes are closed and voices are still. We must watch. We must speak. We must stand. Not just when it is our own blood at risk, but when it is anyone's child. A soft drumbeat fades in, reminiscent of the folktale from earlier, steady, echoing like a heartbeat. If you believe their story must be heard, share this video. Let the world know, silence is not safety.